Stu kind of reshaped the way wingers played in New Zealand. And then it was about, did you have the speed to beat a guy on the outside or chase a kick or maybe a sidestep? With Stu, it became about lines and angles, and this larger-than-life character. Great stories of him, some of the little routines in the dressing room after a game. Not that much of a surprise. I think there was always this feeling with a new chair that there would probably at some stage that there would be a change in CEO.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
Tony Johnson joining us again from Sky Sport. And Tony, before we get into the quarterfinals and look ahead to the semi-finals, obviously the news that Stu Wilson sadly passed on the weekend. I describe him as an All Black icon and a legend because when I grew up as a young kid, him and Bernie were ebony and ivory on the wings for Wellington. And this was back in the early 80s, obviously, when Wellington won in 1 year. They won the championship in the Ranfurly Shield. I think it was 81 by memory. He was an All Black at the time, and I remember that try carving through against France in 1977. The one, of course, against Wales in that crucial Grand Slam tour of 78. He was a fun guy to be around and a fun guy, always to hang with. Look, he was a bit of a larrikin. But he was devilishly charming, he was good looking, and on the rugby field he was one of those, I just think, a real superstar at the time, wasn't he? Not just of New Zealand rugby, but also of international rugby.
Yeah, he was a great player and a great character. And firstly, if you look at the playing side of it, I think Stu kind of reshaped the way wingers played in New Zealand. I mean, for a long time, well, there were times in the 60s and the 50s where wingers were unemployed. And then it was about, did you have the speed to beat a guy on the outside or chase a kick or maybe a sidestep? With Stu, it became about lines and angles. And he had a fantastic combination with Bruce Robertson.
Yes, he did.
And that try that you mentioned against France, he'd been to Argentina the year before, that second string All Black team that had gone there and played unofficial test matches over there, and a whole new group of players came out of that tour, and he was one of them. And he really marked his arrival on the biggest stage in that second test in Paris, where he ran a fantastic angle off a pass by Bruce Robertson to score. The French just didn't even know where he'd come from. And then, as you say, the one against Wales off the chip kick ahead by Bill Osborne, a couple of great tries, including the one in the first test against the Springboks. I think he was playing centre and he carved through off a line out that had gone wrong, and then ran amok against the Lions in 1983, and he equalled Ian Kirkpatrick's record in horrific weather in Dunedin with, again, a try that sort of went against the traffic and on a sodden pitch, and then smashed the record at Eden Park with 3 tries. And that record stood for 5 years until John Kirwan came along. So he was a fantastic player, not the most successful All Black captain. He always laughed about that, captained that understrength team at the end of 1983, and then retired, partly so that he and Bernie, his great mate, could keep the proceeds of their book,
That's
Ebony and Ivory.
Back in those days, if you wrote a book, you were meant to be amateur and you weren't allowed to keep the money from it. So.
Yeah. Exactly. So he broke the mould in a way, or changed the way wingers played in New Zealand. But then, of course, being an All Black had always been a slightly grim business. And Stu just became this larger-than-life character. Great stories of him, some of the little routines in the dressing room after a game. He had a couple. One was, the high diver diving into a bucket of ice, a weightlifter, picking up a pencil or something, but making it look like he was picking up 200 kilos. And the sumo wrestler, I think, were 3 of his routines. Funny on the pitch too. Graham Moody, our old mate, Moods, played with him. Now, I hope I've got this right. College Old Boys in Wellington. Apologies if that's not right, but they played club rugby together. Stu didn't really like being in the bottom of a ruck. He found himself in the bottom of a ruck against, Marison, Pats or Paniki in some lock or prop who wants to bite his head off, and Stu calmly turned around and said, "You got the time, mate?" that was and then, of course, had the privilege of working with him. That impish sense of humour served him well when he went into television. I worked with him for over 10 years at Sky, but the thing about Stu, he always brought something to the table, always prepared himself. He always had notes. He'd always put thought into what he was going to do and say on the show. Could be provocative, controversial, but there was always something there. And so it was a great privilege working with him. And, I kept in touch with him after, and he, moving to the Bay of Plenty, He'd been working as an orderly
in
in Tauranga Hospital.
Yeah.
And he, the last time I saw him, he looked well and he looked happy. And just sadly, I believe a medical event, and he passed away over the weekend at the age of 70. So a great player, but one of the great personalities of New Zealand rugby, and very, very sad to hear of his passing.
More from this on Mex tomorrow. Murray Mex will join us, a great old mate. I mean, those four there, Bernie and Huey and Mex. And
that whole Wellington team.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, gnarly forwards, but some real characters in that back line. And as he and Bernie. Bernie actually set him up for a few more tries than Stu would probably ever acknowledge. And Huey, of course.
Yeah.
Alan Hewson,
Yeah.
he's the try at Eden Park against the Springboks. Yeah, they were something to behold, but they just changed the image, the shape, the way the game was played, those ones.
Mark Robinson, NZR CEO, resigns. We don't know anything about this. This has happened in our ears as we're sitting here talking. So he's had a 6-year tenure. We both know him and been around him a long time. I wish him well. His epitaph will be written by others. It's a massive time of change for New Zealand rugby, and I just wonder whether those winds of change are blowing through and it means that they're looking for new upper management. And I'll leave the criticism or the analysis for another time on this, because neither of us have had much time to process this.
Digest it. Look, not that much of a surprise. I think there was always this feeling with a new chair, some new people on the board, that there would probably at some stage that there would be a change in CEO. It's been a difficult time that he's had to negotiate when you think, there was COVID, there was the Silver Lake business, the whole, I thought, really messy business over whether they were going to replace Ian Foster. And that reflected very badly on New Zealand rugby, as did the end of the whole Sanzar alliance. Not that was necessary. That wasn't really Mark Robinson at all. So a difficult period to negotiate. I suppose had a hard act to follow, because the thing with Steve Chu is that, we all know what Steve Chu, he was an authoritarian sort of a figure, but he always spoke with great clarity and he was always available. Mm-hmm. And
he seemed a lot more forceful, didn't he?
Yeah, and Mark Robinson's a different kind of dude. And as I say, I think there'll be plenty of talk about that. What's going to interest me now is who's going to take his place. Some interesting contenders out there, I'm sure, but it's a huge decision because it's not going to get any easier to navigate. The last 5-6 years have been really tricky. So many twists and turns, potholes in the road, slips falling on the road, all those sorts of things. Who knows what the next 5 or 6 years are like. They need a really good, strong CEO in that position. But for Mark Robinson, he put his hand up for the job. He's a true rugby man, absolutely loves the game, was a very good player, very educated man. And so you just, wish him well for whatever's next for him.
When we talk next Monday, who's going to be in that final?
Look, I just go back to those numbers.
And they're great stats. 30-0 at home, the Crusaders. It's hard to argue against. Yeah. And no Australian team has won
and yet,
any quarter semi-final ever. So.
And yet, like everything this year, I mean, records, they're made to be broken, aren't they?
I don't count the Blues out, and I don't count the Brumbies out.
The curse of the Bambino, all those things, the Billy Goat, all those things, they all end in the end. The mood the Blues are in, you wouldn't rule them out. And you have to respect the Brumbies. But just history, for what it's worth, points to a final in Christchurch between the Crusaders and the Chiefs. But we will see.
This is the DSPN.